Right, yeah, we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us for our Let's Talk Careers events. So we are focused in on health protection and epidemiology in this event. We have two speakers with us today that will be sharing their journey to their current roles and just explaining how they got to where they are right now. So we hope that the information provided in this event will be really useful. Yeah, so we'll get started. We're going to give a brief presentation about Life Science Connections and what we do and how we can help you. So our team consists of myself, Adaronke Beyoku. We have Tolu Oloyede and we have Karima Douglas as well. And we run Life Science Connections and provide all the information, put together these events for you. So Life Science Connections is a platform that aims to help life science students and graduates. And how we help is by hosting quarterly events, and these are career insight events. And during these events, we invite professionals to share their career journeys and also provide insight into their job roles, because there are so many different roles out there that you can work in within life science and also within health as well. And we just provide an opportunity for students and graduates to find out about these many different roles and to just help them once they graduate to, you know, find a route that will better suit them. And we also have blog series. We have 4 main blog series that we post on our website. We have a day in a life where we ask professionals to share a typical day in their life, in their role. Interview diaries where you can get different tips for interviews for different roles, and you can also ask questions or send in questions if you would like to ask questions for a particular role. And we also provide a job of the week as well, or now called job of the month, where we highlight different job roles within the life science and health industry, and also Q&A sessions with professionals. So those are the main blog series that we have running on our website. So, okay, no, this is the wrong one. So what I'll do now is hand over to our first speaker for today. And our first speaker is Josh, and he's a health protection practitioner. And yeah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Adaronke. Good evening, everyone. Josh, as introduced, I'm here just to talk about, I talk quite informally, as if I've known you a long time. So hopefully we'll make an explore and enjoy some sort of light-hearted bits in between, but just hopefully I will give you a gist of how I got into what I got into, health protection practitioning, which was sort of an unorthodox journey itself. And yeah, just a bit of me about me as a person and where I am today and what I'm thinking about doing next. So what I'll do is share my screen. Okay, it's disabled, it's saying. One sec. Oh, it says you're sharing the screen at the moment, that's why. I'll try again. Okay, no, it's disabled by, I don't know if there's a setting where we can change that. Oh, okay. You're going to do it on yourself. Okay. That's fine. I'll just indicate when to change it over. Cool. I'll make a start then. So yeah, I've titled it A Route Less Traveled, Health Protection. We'll just get into it really. Next slide, please. So yeah, I'm just going to talk about the beginnings, as I've mentioned, and sort of my thoughts along my journey. I started off as a biomedical scientist, so just talking about sort of how I got there and what my thoughts were from that point, because I'm someone that really didn't know what I wanted to do at a lot of points along my education. to be honest. So yeah, I'll just show you sort of various navigations and just give some helpful tips along the way. And just what I was thinking next. Next slide, please. So this is just a bit about me, Grenadian, Nigerian heritage, sort of folks I admire when I wish to come back, i.e. Igalo, for any Man United fans out there. And I also in music management, so a friend from uni, it kind of happened by accident, but that's sort of one of my passions, music as well. So that's my artist name is Bliss, if you want to check him out, really dope guy. And yeah, my sister just happened to take up powerlifting at university and was pretty good. So I'm proud of her. She's doing a lot, sort of locally and nationally with Great Britain. So yeah. And then the picture on the left is me sort of back at school. I went to a boarding school, so I had a really interesting beginning. Introduced me to a lot, but I'm sort of thankful for it because it formed a lot of what I'm doing today. Next slide, please. So yes, back to the beginning. It was sort of a toss-up between sports science and biological sciences. I was sort of naturally quite sporty, oftentimes indulged too much in sports and left sort of academics to the side a lot of the time. But when it came to obviously the back end of school and you have to pick your subjects, etc. So biology I knew was sort of one of the ones I was interested naturally in. And it sort of gave me flexibility, biology, and doing biomedical science, which is what I went on to do at University of Essex in Colchester. Any of you that are familiar with that. And I was able to, and what I was trying to do is get somewhere where I was able to do a placement year, because it would just open up an opportunity for me to get a taste of what industry was like before finishing. So that was initially not on the cards at Essex, but sort of partway through. They said they still had some hospital links. So I ended up going to Harlow and Princess Alexandra Hospital. I don't know if any of you that know it. So I did a year there in the microbiology department, and here's some sort of pictures of me, which actually came directly from my state registration. So you do your state registration, and then when you finish your degree, you go back and you become state registered. So there's me sort of in the category 3 facility, working with some TB and some purity plates for one organism or another. And I got to, I think the MALDI-TOF was quite new then for any of you who have any kind of biomed background. So I got to play around with that and actually did my final year project on sort of MALDI-TOF, comparing sort of the preparation for blood culture diagnosis with their traditional setup, and sort of time efficiency and things like that were major things they were trying to look at, and obviously our cost effectiveness, etc. So that was pretty fun, just getting to look at that technology, which I'd only read in textbooks up until that point. And so yeah, after graduating in Essex, I then was positioned to do sort of, I was positioned better than sort of a lot of colleagues, and that's something I would emphasize now, just in terms of if you can seek to do one and there's an opportunity, even if you have to go to sort of relatives, friends of friends, etc. Do seek it out actively, because it really does help, not only from the employer point of view, but from your point of view when you do enter wherever it is you go. You already have that practical experience, and they've already put things from like your learning into actual practice. So do get onto that if you have the smallest links. So yeah, I've described it as getting my feet wet. They did throw me in at the deep end actually, so I'm not sure about that. It was more of an immersion, but it was a situation which helped me sort of go into my next step, which was into specialist reference microbiology. Next slide, please. So I went into PHE, what was then Public Health England, now UKHSA, as you can see from the headers on my slides. I went into the respiratory and systemic bacterial section, and interestingly started working in the zoonotic arm of this, the respiratory section, with these funny things called leptospires. So the first picture you can see there is sort of an electron micrograph of one. Really funny things that live in sort of mammals, typically sort of rats, who then pass urine into sort of open water areas, etc. And if humans have sort of open abrasions, cuts, etc., it then transmits that way via humans. it's not really a major problem in the country, but hence its reference, we still sort of do surveillance on it and we test things to confirm whether it's there in humans and what species as well. We develop sort of speciation via something called multi-locus sequence typing, which is like a molecular procedure to try and speciate. And we do a load of genomics just to try and match up against our reference lab, just in short. But don't worry, I won't get too technical with it. Next to that, there's a colleague sort of just going through the reception of samples. So the whole basis of reference microbiology is usually tested elsewhere in sort of a local lab. So when you go to a GP, you go for a hospital appointment, you'll take a sample and it will go through to a local NHS lab, typically, or private lab. And then for anything that is sort of a notifiable disease, it will come through to us. And by notifiable, I mean sort of by law, it's on sort of the higher risk diseases or rare diseases list for this country. So then it will come to us. We have like specialist quote unquote facilities to test. And we do a lot of sort of research with our samples. So we do a lot of sort of sample storage and aliquots, storage of aliquots. So yeah, that's the rest of the pictures. Sorry, the rest of the picture sort of depicts the rest of the process from sort of setting up the micro agglutination titer, which is micro agglutination test. We thought we're working so long, I remember. My colleague on the left, and then looking at sort of the screening of the agglutination. And then from there, we go on to sort of diagnose and speciate. And the last of which was actually a really fun field day. So aside from just sort of the lab side of things, taking that and actually getting a taste of doing surveillance in the field was pretty invaluable at the time. As you can see, I'm enjoying myself by the grin on my face. We actually teamed up with colleagues from APHA, the Animal, Plant and Health Agency, as obviously leptospiras via sort of their mammalian hosts sort of interlink. And then we went to basically ask farmers, what did they know about lepto and were they vaccinating their stock, etc., their cattle and their herds of sheep, etc. So that was fun. And I then presented sort of at our PHE conference, just some findings, which very inconclusive, but generally speaking, they didn't know much about lepto. It's very sort of niche. An interesting one for those that want to go and look at that disease in particular. Just to finish off, also in that section, we did Legionella, there's another respiratory disease. We also did mycoplasma, uroplasma diagnosis. We also did avian influenza, which sort of passes, I think, typically through like pigeons, domestically anyways. So we had sort of category 3 facilities in the reference lab to deal with sort of those high risk organisms. And as I've got as a last point here, outbreak surveillance, that sort of came through events like the field trip, like going to conferences on sort of emerging diseases, zoonotic diseases, and I came across certain things which just started to expand the horizons in my brain at least, and start thinking outside the box. What might I want to do when I get bored of the lab? So next slide, please. This is an organogram of what my current organization in health protection looked like up until they changed into UKHSA. So we have a regional director who, I mean, obviously it's not here, he feeds in to the, what is now the, sorry, one second. What is now the health protections lead, and everything underneath is as is now, except the health and well-being. So what it is with the health and well-being is that they are now formed OHID, which is the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities. So they made that a separate entity now, where they look at health promotion. So the things essentially that are going to elongate life, how can we improve sort of the obesity levels, things like reducing smoking, health promotion in terms of fitness, diet, that kind of thing. So everything, as you can see here, is the same apart from sort of that health and well-being. And then I fit in sort of into, as you can see, the healthcare, public health roles under the, which is highlighted green. Yes, it is. I did that to help myself and yourself. And the EPRR, we sort of work very closely with the Emergency Preparedness and Resilience team. So that's what that EPRR means, which is essentially health protection, which you'll see on the next slide, if you can change, is our core, under our core functions here. infectious diseases, chemical and radiation hazards, major emergencies. And essentially what we're doing is to try and reduce and prevent these things. I worked in the infectious diseases as that's where my interests were. I mean, technically I could have got rotated, but I was brought in on a fixed term right in the middle of the COVID pandemic, just to give you some context. So that was my main focus. And as you can see here, it involves a lot of surveillance and monitoring and even just maintenance of that system, so that when we had the new strains, as you could see in the media, of COVID, the VA.2 to, I think it's about 5 now, we're on VA.5, we can keep up to date and ensure obviously that it's a bulletproof system for recording and alerts. So on a daily basis, essentially what we do, guaranteed, is take calls from community settings, and sometimes even the service users themselves that are affected. So these range from sort of care homes to schools to prisons to workplaces. So just the nature of it is very dynamic, and that's why it interested me also, because it brought the outbreak side I was interested from the lab into sort of varied settings. Hence I was able to learn about specific procedures and the people that govern those areas as well. So our work heavily involves a lot of the local authorities. Name some other abbreviations of sort of partners and stakeholders. So CCDCs are communicable control of communicable disease consultants. That's a bit of a mouthful, I forgot there. They're sort of the top tier. So what you couldn't see on that previous organogram, they would have been the top of the next tier down, if that makes sense. So they're sort of like my bosses, if you like. And they sort of lead the briefing. So when the new COVID strains came up, when most recently the monkeypox, there would have been an incident director, who would have been a consultant as well. So we work with them to sort of establish our local algorithms, and the epidemiologists help us, for example, with the prisons, giving us situation reports weekly if there has been an outbreak, i.e. 2 or more cases that have been linked in that setting, i.e. we've traced contact with someone, i.e. a staff or someone that maybe has just been moved into the prison. And the epidemiologists will provide reports for our incident meetings with the prisons, and then the prisons have their own ecosystem. So you do learn a lot. So that's just an example. And our business support officers, it'll be a crime not to mention them, because they're real saviors, because they pick up a lot of the stuff that can filter out all the stuff that doesn't really need to come to us. And they take a lot of the first line response calls as well. And surge capacity is essentially just the capacity to respond to the things like I've just mentioned, like COVID and monkeypox. That's part of the reason why I was there, because they increased the workforce for COVID, because they realized the enormity of it and how that rapidly it was spreading, and sort of the severity of just the common man, even without sort of underlying health conditions. So that was where I came in. And just an overview of sort of my region. So I worked in the east of England, which is one of 18 regions nationally. It happens to be the biggest one, so my hands are usually quite full. But as I said, it makes for sort of a more diverse day. You know, you don't know what you're going to get. It can get overloaded, as you might imagine, but the team, I've enjoyed working with the team particularly, which I suppose makes most workplaces. And the last abbreviation there is the COVID cell response team. So that's what I did. And then now sort of towards the back end, I'm now sort of in the general acute response. So I've got to work with more gastrointestinal, avian flu, and monkeypox follow-up most recently. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are just some of the things that I've learned, and in a period of just trying to, my head is always ticking, always proactive. I'm like, okay, even if I'm not maybe enjoying where I am at the moment, how can I make the most of it? I happen to be enjoying it, but it's just an encouragement for those that maybe are in a place that they're looking for the next thing and aren't so happy. Just what are the things that maybe you should try and milk out of your current situation? So in relation to health protection, what I started to think of was, okay, and I suppose naturally you get somewhere and you're trying to understand processes. So how do I understand these things and assimilate them as quickly as possible? And as I've put here, you're sort of always a student, and I found that's been the case since I started. Because of the nature of these workflows in health protection, it comes sort of from the top down. So there's the national team, which goes into the regional teams as per the previous organogram. And it gets fed down to us. And then there could be a change as soon as sort of half a week later. So you really got to keep abreast, I suppose, even in your own time as if you were studying. So I'd encourage you to do the same in whatever your field you're in, and particularly if you're going into health protection or thinking about it. Because it does, you are the first line response, and you sort of need to come with a certain degree of knowledge and accurate knowledge as well. So that's one thing that's useful. Also, sort of the prioritization of your workload, which you've probably seen in most job descriptions if you're looking at jobs. But this again, I'll emphasize for health protection. And I've put here in brackets, multitasking could actually be your enemy, even though it's seen as a good trait. In health protection, you have things coming at you all the time. So for example, in monkeypox right now, where I'm dealing with cases and holding initial interviews, so it comes via our system, for example, via the hospital that they've gone to get checked out and they've had their sample at. It will go via Ripple, which is the rare imported pathogens lab important, to get confirmed, and then we get via a surveillance system a confirmation that that person is positive. We then have to take on that interview with the case to ask the preliminary questions to help our epi team firstly record it and obviously help the patient with the right pathway to go down in terms of making sure they're not transmitting to others, i.e. isolating properly. Do they understand the isolation guidance? Can they tell us also other high-risk settings that they've been to in the time that they've been infectious? So for monkeypox, that's when you have the onset of symptoms until sort of one of the symptoms, the scabs fall off. So that's just an example of sort of dealing with the end service user and being able to prioritize that over maybe less urgent things, such as so for example, I had a call from, and you might say this is harsh, but I had a call from a workplace, actually a National Institute of Health Research, who were looking to deal with monkeypox in the next week or so and wanted to get the prophylactic vaccine for their colleagues. And I had to unfortunately deprioritize that just because we were getting loads of fresh confirmed cases of monkeypox. So that's just an example to emphasize that point. I've also got here just making sure that your communications are relevant. Put practice selective modification. So it kind of ties in with prioritization a bit. And then also timely dissemination to your stakeholders. Because for example, I've mentioned the local authorities. You're also dealing with, say, if it's a prison governors. You're also dealing with the department, the directors of public health, if you have to escalate, for example, a confirmed monkeypox, as well as maybe care home managers who look after high-risk setting care homes or supported living, etc. So timely dissemination, as you can imagine, for some of the diseases and the intrinsic properties is quite essential. And lastly, just project management skills. I mean, that was probably the most recent one that has dawned on me, and I've sort of been making a more of an effort to get involved with it and sort of flex, if you like, in my current situation, because a lot of the jobs and the sort of higher bands of jobs, so just to make clear, I'm sort of band 6 where I am, and it involves a lot of project management as well as the basic requirements of maybe like a first degree and a master's. So just going beyond sort of what is on your current JD to really just get your hands dirty. So for example, I went in the middle of COVID when we were stepping down nationally, and now you might be aware we've got the living with COVID guidance that we should be following, and they're reducing a lot of the workforce and resources naturally. And so hence a lot of the memorandums of agreements with our local authorities and partners changed. So we had to adjust as a workforce to understand, okay, well, we've got this call just come through now, which path does it go down? So that's just an example of that really. And being able to communicate, disseminate that to your colleagues and being able to guide them. So I took on a bit more of a leadership role, which it served me well, and it serves as something you can write in your CV as well, and you don't have to brag about it when you get to an interview if you get one. So that's a bonus. And then as you've probably been browsing the sort of knowledge and experience, I've just taken an excerpt of what I believe was the job I'm in. Yeah, the Band 6 health protection job. So you can just have a quick browse of some of the things which are sort of reinforced. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is the spider diagram of opportunities, I'll call it. So I've put in traditional versus left field. When I say left field, I just mean outside the box. I've actually experienced that, which I'll get into in a sec quite recently. I hope it's visible on your side. It is on mine. So other allied professions that you could get into from a career in health protection, or actually take a step two, like I have. As you know, I'm a biomedical science, so I've included that here as well. EHOs are environmental health officers with whom we work with a lot. For example, with Legionella, and when we have food outbreaks. So when I had a care home recently where we had an outbreak linked to a kitchen. So we have to get those environmental health officers on board, because a lot of their actions from there are sort of within their remit and outside of ours. The APHA, as I mentioned earlier, actually in the Collindale context in that field day, we involve them a lot with regards to the zoonotic diseases. And if you have pets, for example, in monkeypox, we actually have a questionnaire. Our SNAP survey includes that question because of what's been publicized with regards to monkeypox being transmitted amongst certain pets. So they also get involved, and also with avian influenza, which I've done a little bit of as well. And health visitors, etc. Field epidemiology, as you've heard, we work very closely with them. So that's another opportunity there in terms of just understanding the transmission of disease in time and space. This local public health strategist one is one that I've put in there just because in my own searches, there's been a lot of need for that in a local council. So you'll be working directly with the council to help sort of understand disease within a certain population and demographic. So I put that there. And I also have the emergency preparedness resilience stuff that I mentioned earlier as well. The CCG, the commissioning group for the NHS also, that also will tie into having sort of project management skills there would be great. And also if you've maybe even got accountancy background, you can still find yourself working in science and in that commissioning sector there. They do a lot for the community, but that is now rapidly evolving and being centered around the integrated care system, which I don't know if you've seen in the media since COVID, sort of the peaks of the COVID pandemic, but that's now sort of as a consequence of the failures of the response to COVID, if you like. So they're now, as the name says, integrating a lot of the community settings to make the flow of information particularly easily accessible and digestible for the sort of primary and secondary healthcare divisions. And when I say primary and secondary, I mean from like your people facing GPs, hospital A&Es, to sort of your rehabilitation centres would be more like a secondary health setting. And there's also global health opportunities, which actually personally is something that I'm looking at. So just to be transparent, I'm actually part of the workforce that is being let go. I'm not actually let the people that invite me know that yet, but it's an exclusive for you all. So I'm actually looking at other areas of interest. I would ideally like to stay in health protection, but if that opportunity doesn't present, the next best for me actually would be global health, and the IHR is essentially the international health regulation. So that's all sort of the UK overseas territories, including what we've got, the South Americas, the Caribbean, and all the other British territories, where you can go and do a lot of sort of the same emergency preparedness resilience work overseas. And I like the idea of traveling as well, so I'll be on my street. And then we've got here the UK Public Health Rapid Response Team. So I'm getting my acronym in a twist there, but that's essentially what it means. Which actually I got an initial talk when I was in Collindale from at a Zoonotic and Emergent Disease Symposium for the University of Liverpool. And that's sort of where my fascination with outbreak first started. So they do a lot of work, but it's very, as the name says, you have to have a certain level of experience do a certain amount of courses, including like security courses, because you're going to areas where the security is not as good as here. And so there's more risks other than just potentially catching a newly emerging disease. So that's that. And what have we got here? Health promotion, we've touched on. They're an entity now, I believe, led by Kevin Fenton in the London region anyways. He did a lot of sort of consulting the government throughout COVID. And then we've got the other side, which is sort of this further education, which you can do masters, doctorates in any of sort of the aforementioned area really, the main one being public health, and it would give you sort of a good advantage going into any of these professions really. And I've put here the Public Health Specialty Registrar Programme because that's one that's really been promoted in the East of England health protection team. And a lot of the consultants we work with went down that path as well. So it's one that they say they benefit from. And it's not, you do like a year, or essentially like a master's, and then you get 4 years then working in the field that you want to specialise in, getting that workplace experience, which, as I said earlier, is so beneficial if that's something you're interested in. Next slide, please. So yeah, just finally, just to summarise everything, sorry if I have waffled a bit, but I hope you've taken some bits from it. But this is sort of what I want to leave you with in terms of just lessons in health protection and science and just in life in general. So the first of which is just to talk to colleagues where you are, make the most out of your peers, those who are your seniors, really be proactive, especially if you know where your desired destination is. There's so many people that are wanting to help you and give you even just an opportunity to shadow maybe something outside of your job description. So do that, or make it habitual if you're not quite doing that yet. Really make that a good practice. Secondly, I would say try different things. I actually had a talk with Kevin Fenton, my old boss, put me in touch when I found out they were reducing the health protection workforce after the step down in COVID nationally. And he was just giving me an array of things, obviously including his own overhead section, health promotion. But he encouraged me really to put my hands to different things and really find out what it is that you want. And I consider myself fairly young, 28, going on 29. So I think time is on my side to do that. So yeah, I mean, a personal testimony, I'm looking at potentially going into sort of field application science, which is actually more on the lab side, but it is related to sort of my strength and background in biomedical science and the biotechnology I use there. But I'm still able to have sort of a people-facing role and consult people and support. The labs integrate those technologies into their system, so that was why that was attractive. I've just had an interview for that, so I wish me luck. The next thing is just don't underestimate the new habits, which I've touched on. Just in life in general, a lot of things you just have to keep going at until it becomes second nature, particularly in the space where you're looking at your next career choice. Just do those things, identify them, look at things like job descriptions ahead of time, and just identify the things, the small things that you can keep cracking on with in your daily routine. And lastly, one from an artist actually, I pulled up to you, it's a good one. Biased as I can be, but it's all about time and seasons. It's about doing what you want to do and doing it in your own way. It's up to you. Life is not designed to be completely formulaic. You get what you put into it with a guarantee of fortune. That's what I believe anyways. Along the way, providing you take responsibility for being intentional. So whatever it is, if it's health protection that has piqued your interest today, then just do what you have to do, whether it's taking that first step to just look it up, do research, or you can have a private conversation with me after. Our details should be on the last slide if you want to move to that. So feel free to contact me and we can talk some more, and I can just give you some practical ways to get started. I'll put you in touch with people that will allow you to just open your horizons in that area. But thank you. I've been Josh. I haven't actually clocked how long I've been on here, but that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Josh. That was really, really insightful. Yeah, I'm glad you went into a lot of detail with all the different acronyms as well. Because I was just reading through, I was like, what is that? What is that? So every industry have their own acronyms, so it's a good job you did that. One thing I did forget to mention is that we are going to be having a Q&A session at the end, so please do leave your questions in the chat, and we will direct them to all the speakers, to both the speakers at the end. So thanks again, Josh, and I will now hand over to Alice.
Hi everybody, and thank you very much for introducing me. My name's Alice Demuth. I have a very different background. I'm currently intensive care critical lead for one of the Nuffield hospitals based in Oxford. But I've had quite a varied background, and it predominantly has involved infectious diseases and critical care, because they're my passions really. And when I left school, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, probably like most people. So I ended up I knew I loved microbiology, and that was after learning about the tsetse fly in my geography lesson. So from that, I decided to do a BTEC in pharmaceutical sciences with a view of becoming a pharmacist. However, unfortunately, I ended up in intensive care before I went to university with sepsis, which in those days, it wasn't really no sepsis. It was just, I had very bad tonsillitis that I required ventilation for. And that changed my whole life. And from that point, I decided I wanted to be an intensive care nurse. So with that, my passion was also the military. I was in the Sea Cadets and spent lots of time sort of messing around on the water, and I wanted to do it full time. So I was very lucky to get one of 5 places which they hadn't advertised for 5 years. So one of 5 places out of 2,000 candidates to become a Royal Navy nurse and train in the military. So I trained at one of our last military hospitals in Portsmouth, and funnily enough, ended up going to the university that I was meant to study pharmacy at. So it was obviously meant to be me in Portsmouth. And that was really interesting because the kind of cases I was seeing, obviously we still had NHS patients and everything like that, but we did see infectious diseases. Usually, love the Navy, they bring home interesting things. And it was literally like I was the student nurse and I had a patient who had a wound and something growing out of it, So we took it to the microbiology and we grew it. The Navy were brilliant and they understood that I had this interest in infectious diseases and microbiology. So I was allowed to spend lots of time in the labs. And I was allowed to do projects and things. So like I did a project on how to clean nebulizing pots, whether you dry them, clean them, or dry them with oxygen, or you drip dry them. And I was allowed to have all the facilities that I could go to the labs and just grow anything I wanted to. And I was really supported. During this time, I obviously went back to intensive care. I did a lot of burns because we were one of the burns units that accepted burns from London, and again then got to see things like MRSA and how destructive it can be to the human body when it gets in places it shouldn't really get, leading to above knee amputations, and other sort of reconstructive surgery, which is really, really interesting. During this time, I got a chance to go to Canada for 3 years, and I worked in an infectious diseases intensive care in Ottawa. During this time, I did a degree in earth sciences as well, because they didn't have an infection control course over there. And that led me to then go and work on a primary survey team for an E. coli outbreak that happened nearby. And that involved me doing soil samples and identifying what the lay of the land was. So for me, I identified that it was limestone, which I meant I knew there was blocks, and that meant there was underground water, underground wells. Looking at the weather system, looking at what had been going on that year, we identified that there was increased rainwater. This had essentially flooded cow fields that have then led to contamination of the water with E. coli from cow feces, basically. What happened was the town that was involved in this actually lived off well water. But the problem was it was tested every day, and the people who tested it ignored the results, and it led to 2 fatalities. So they ended up being convicted of manslaughter. But it was fascinating. It was so interesting. And then I was really lucky, the intensive care I worked in, because it did specialize basically anything that needed a side room. So it was burns and infectious diseases. That meant that I got to look after things like hantavirus, West Nile disease. What else did I look after? Well, anything really that needed a side room, and necrotizing fasciitis. as I said, I found it really, really interesting. And I was lucky that they prioritised those patients for me to look after. While I was there, SARS hit. So initially they were going, it won't affect us in Ottawa because, Toronto's like 4 hours drive down the road. And obviously, COVID does stop when it gets to the boundaries. However, it was once we found that one of our A&E members of staff had tested positive for SARS, that we tested all our pneumonia patients, because it happened in about May 2003. So we were coming out of a 6-month winter. So we were expecting to see respiratory disease. We were waiting to see these kind of pneumonias coming in because that's how it is in Canada, because of the extreme temperatures that they have. However, we tested all our sort of normal pneumonia patients to find that they were all SARS. I have to admit, Public Health Canada, absolutely amazing. They instantly shut down our hospital to visitors. They instantly put a block so that you had to have your temperature taken before you came in. And if you had a temperature, you had to have a really good reason. So we'd all had bronchitis, most of the ITU, which probably was actually SARS. But I'd been on antibiotics for 2 weeks, so I was allowed to go to work. Full PPE was put in place, FFP3 masks, everything. And the relatives were only allowed to come in if it was end of life. And they were able to maintain SARS pretty quickly in Ottawa. I would say within about 6 weeks, it was maintained. And said, I can't credit them enough for just stopping everything. They didn't do a full lockdown like we did for the second SARS outbreak that we've just dealt with, because there were the cases in the community, but not like we saw with this one. And Toronto, they did the same, and they were able to slam it down pretty quickly. On my return to the UK, I decided to transfer over to the Royal Air Force and become a nursing officer. And the reason for that is we'd become tri-service at this point. So all 3 services sort of mixed together, really. And we all had our certain specialities. And the Royal Air Force was infectious diseases. So I got an opportunity to train on the air transportable isolator. So I was trained to bring people home who had Lassa fever from Africa. And that was, again, really, really interesting. And I got to learn a lot and work a lot with microbiology and our public health within the military. On leaving the military, I worked in the NHS in Birmingham, where I trained to be an infection control nurse with Health Protection Agency, as it was Public Health England, of course, is now UKHSA. And I worked at the lead lab in the West Midlands at Heartlands Hospital. Again, it was quite interesting. I was really lucky because I got to do they knew I liked bugs. So I just spent a lot of time on the benches having a look at really interesting things. And then I did my course at Oxford Brookes. And again, I got to go to the labs here and see sort of gruesome things in pots and what they were growing, which I found quite interesting, but nobody else seemed to really. And again, that was really interesting. But then I decided to go to the hospital sort of just down the road on a promotion. And that's when I started seeing really interesting things. It was a very deprived area. It is one of the most deprived areas in the country. It's West Bromwich. And there, sometimes we didn't even know what we were dealing with. Intensive care would call me in and go, what do you think is wrong with this patient from an infectious disease point of view? And myself and the microbiologist were standing there going, we don't know. Have you done a Legionella screen? Have you checked for anything, botulism? Have you checked for this? And we just, sometimes we just didn't know what was wrong with these patients from an infectious disease point of view. So then I'd come in from a point of view of, this is what PPE you need to wear to protect yourselves. I was also there when Ebola came out, and we had a very large West African population. So we sort of prepared for the worst. We had a lot of illegal immigrants as well. So we put things in place. We decided to work on the PPE ASAP and try and devise something, because at the time, Public Health England and also the NHS had not done anything about it. There was nothing sufficient out there. So there was my background with the military. I was still a reservist, so I was still involved in the military from an infectious disease point of view. And I was also working with an Army infectious diseases registrar. So basically, we put our heads together and worked with maternity, A&E, ITU, the British Midland Eye Centre, which was where we were as well, and paediatrics, to identify the most appropriate PPE that we would need for our environment. That was partly based on looking at what the CDC was doing across the pond, because they had already started working on it. And then what we did was we tried different ways. We tried different PPE. We tried what they suggested. And then what we actually use is the glow gel. So the glow gel that you use for infection control to identify if you've washed your hands properly, we then use that to identify if we're contaminating our uniforms or ourselves. Simple things. I've got a longish fringe. You know, I noticed as soon as I took my hat off, I moved my hair out the way. So there we realized that if you've got long hair, you have to put it up and you have to pin it back. My glasses kept falling down my nose. So therefore, we did like orthopedic surgeons and we taped my glasses on my face, pretty much. Then we moved on to different ways. So we also, there was the teaching elements of it as well. So we did videos of donning and doffing of PPE. We did pathways, how to get bloods to the lab without it going through the chute system in case it broke, how to get suspected cases and their bloods down to Porton Down. We tested 14 people with 3 of those going to Porton Down because, you know, we just didn't know. Informing security about how they deal with a patient that's kicking off basically, but they might be infectious. You know, so what we did was we got or someone who's vomiting. So we went to the paramedics and we got their vomit bags, which seal up. Cleaning, we worked with the cleaners, how to clean that room effectively. And we worked with so many departments of how to actually achieve this, that actually by the end of it, everybody felt very reassured. And then we went to a meeting with the West Midlands, like the police, the ambulance, Public Health England, and they were going, we need to do this, we need to go that. And we were saying, no, sorry, that doesn't work. And then eventually they just said, City and Sound, well, can you come up and speak to us, please, about what you've done? But we knew that we were at risk, more at risk than the other hospitals like University Hospital, Birmingham and Heartlands. We were more at risk than they were, so therefore we acted very quickly. But it was a really good learning experience. And then I was able to take that information back to the military because I was on standby to go to Sierra Leone as the head of infection control. So then after that, I was asked to go to work for the military, back as a civilian, to be the head of infection control for Defence Primary Healthcare. This was across the world. It wasn't just the UK. This was Africa, Brunei, Canada, Gibraltar, Cyprus. I can't think where else, but lots of places. And that was not, it was putting processes in place to prevent the spread of infection. I worked very closely with environmental health because a lot of our buildings are not built to be health centres. They're very old, they're very decrepit, and they have a lot of rats, unfortunately, that you can't, it's really hard to get off. I even had a med centre that had rats and bats. They phoned me to inform me that a bat had just flown into their clinical room. So it's dealing with that, which was really, really interesting. And I walked into pharmacy and saw some really sort of funky mold growing. And I was like, I don't know what that is. So I sent that to environmental health. I sent a picture and said, do you know what this is? Oh, I better put a mask on while I'm in there breathing it in. So again, that was really useful, but it's when it comes into play and you don't realise how infrastructure is so important in the prevention of spread of disease. Because I was looking at infrastructure for the med centre in Brunei. The floor kept lifting, the NHS government, you know, floor that we were meant to adhere to was lifting, it didn't work. So we turned around and said, what do they do in Brunei? They said the tile. So that's what we did. We tiled the med centre rather than using the government recommendations because it is guidance, so we can adapt it and actually we risk assess the situation. And actually having the NHS flooring where the glue doesn't stick because it's too warm over there was actually causing more an infection control risk than actually, and a trip risk as well, fall risk, than actually having tiles. Again, I worked on the refurbishment of the med centre in Kenya as well. And again, we had to look at the water from a Legionella point of view and how to maintain the temperatures or keep the temperatures down within those optimum levels so Legionella didn't grow within the water tanks. And from there, I was missing clinical. I have to admit, I was missing intensive care. So I came back. When I came back into the NHS, I came back as a matron of intensive care. 3 months later, SARS hit. So, COVID hit. So I wasn't too concerned. I have to admit, I was used to doing, you know, sort of mass casualties and operations with the military and obviously infectious diseases. So I was quite happy. Everyone else was a little bit concerned, but you know what? We managed it. Then our infection control team all went off sick, which wasn't helpful really. However, what I basically did was focus on the infection control side and the preventative measures, which were simple things. It was like, you know, making everything lean, making sure everything wasn't cluttered, making sure things weren't on the floor, making sure there's appropriate donning and doffing areas. I'd learnt a lot from doing my time with Ebola, so I was able to put that into place there. This made me see how much I sort of enjoyed. And obviously working in Birmingham as well, I'd seen a lot of deprivation, even working in Canada as well. I'd worked with the indigenous population and I'd seen deprivation, and it shouldn't happen in this day and age. I shouldn't see children coming into hospital with rickets. That sort of really was the breaking point for me. I was like, no, enough's enough. So I started my master's in public health then. I then got the opportunity to become clinical lead for infection control within local authority in London. And again, I was able to use my skills to identify, you know, the health needs assessment regarding infectious diseases. I did miss clinical. I miss being an ITU nurse. So I've now come back to intensive care, where I'm the band aid and the matron of intensive care here. But I'm still continuing with my master's. And this was a big question for me because I really missed being a nurse. I missed being hands-on. I missed my patients. I missed the adrenaline rush of being an intensive care nurse. And I spoke to one of my public health consultants where I worked, who's a very wise lady, and Nike. And I said to her, like, can I have my cake and eat it? Can I study public health? Can I help reduce inequalities in health and still be a clinical nurse? And she was like, yes, of course you can. So what I've done is I've worked with my university, Oxford Brookes, and I basically write my assignments looking at it from a public health point of view. So I'm currently looking at, you know, what are the trends for our admissions? You know, is there something going on? So certain hospitals I've worked in, there's been more drug abuse related admissions. So can we do something with that? Others, it's been more alcohol. You know, so I've also been looking at how we can reduce healthcare acquired infections, because obviously sometimes they will end up in intensive care as well. And I'm looking at antibiotic stewardship, so my pharmaceutical sciences is coming into play as well. So I think that just shows you that, you know what, you can have your cake and eat it, and you don't have to stick to one career. You can move around. I've moved around. I've done various things, and you can adapt. I said I wanted to come back to ITU, but I wanted to do public health as well. And now I'm getting to do it. And now I'm getting to look at Oxford and how we can improve their health. What can we do to stop them coming into ITU? Although it means I'm out of a job, but you know, what can I do to help reduce admissions? Is there something we're missing that we need to focus on, that we can work with the local NHS trust to do it? So I just say, you know what, just listen to your peers and trust your judgment. Keep looking, because you will find it. And as I said, you know, it was thanks to Nike of Richmond and Wandsworth Council that I can have my cake and eat it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice. That was super insightful. Yeah, I really enjoyed just hearing about just your journey within from, you know, nursing to, you know, public health, still in nursing, but still public health, and just seeing how they, you know, how they interact and how they even work together as well. That was really interesting. So yeah, thank you again. So now we're going to move on to our Q&A session, and I will hand over to Karima.
Just wanted to say thank you, Alice and Joshua, just again, and they really were really interesting talks. I just really enjoy when we do this, because I learn so much, you know, within healthcare, within science, you know, within life sciences, and there really is so much to learn, and just hearing about people's journeys and how they got to the point that they're at is so valuable. So I hope that our attendees, you know, I'm sure that they did feel the same. We have got some questions, and we'll start with those and then see how we go, if that's okay. So we have got the first question. What is the difference between public health and health protection?
Who is that for, or is it for either of us?
I think for either of you, that question.
Okay. I just see health protection as a subsidiary, really. So it's all interlinked in terms of public health and the prevention and reduction of the impact of disease in population. really. And as you've seen today through sort of my analysis, we've just seen it through different lenses. So that's how I'd answer that.
Anything to
Yeah,
add?
I'd say well, yeah, I'd say the same actually, because when I worked at Richmond and Wandsworth Council, I was in health protection. So I was protecting my population, but it wasn't just from infectious diseases. When you look at other things, you're doing that preventative element as well. So yeah, it all interacts. It's all part, as you say, subsidiary of public health.
Thank you. And then a question for Alice. Could you please tell us more about the glow gel?
The glow gel, well, it's very exciting. So basically, when we teach infection control, we teach hand hygiene, we get people to put gel on their hands and they put it under ultraviolet light and it glows. And then just a bit like when you're out and they've got ultraviolet light on, you've got a white t-shirt, it works exactly the same. Then we get people to wash their hands and then they can see under the ultraviolet light the areas that they've missed, which is usually around the nail beds. And everything like that. So we use that gel. It's not actually licensed for using it, but we were able to use that with the gel on our hands to identify when you're when you were doffing your PPE, you're taking your PPE off. We were able to see where we then go over with an ultraviolet light and see where we'd contaminated, like our uniforms, our hair, or anything like that, and then we'd adapt. So originally, the CDC for Ebola was saying, FFP3 mask, visor, a bit like, to be quite honest, it's pretty much the same as it was for COVID, except it wasn't a gown; it was an apron. And we noticed from that, it doesn't matter how careful you are, you contaminate your uniform. So therefore, we then moved to gowns. Then we looked at how to take the gown off effectively. Then we looked at gloves. We found we contaminated things. So then we went to maternity gloves, which come up to about here. And that's how we use the glow. So it's not licensed for that, but we found it extremely useful in identifying when and where we were contaminating and then adapted PPE accordingly.
That's really, really interesting. And yes, so much can be, was obviously learned from that. It's just amazing because, if I just think about the adaptations that we made in our clinical environment because of COVID to try and limit, the spread, but, something like that shows that actually we're wearing an apron over your scrubs probably doesn't, offer you as much protection as you thought it did in terms of limiting, the spread. So yeah, that's really, really interesting. Thank you. Right, so we have another question here for Josh. Did you experience any obstacles in trying to transition into public health? And if so, how did you deal with them?
Yeah, interesting question. Obstacles, I suppose, no, I wouldn't describe them as obstacles. Obviously, there was things that I was always considering about, okay, I've been at this conference, I found out about the UK Public Health Rapid Support Team. Like, what does that look like? I had those kind of questions go around my head, but I suppose in the lab environment, one that I would say is trying to find the route. That was probably my obstacle, just trying to get the foot in, which ultimately can be, you can knock that door down through just having conversations. So for example, I actually was studying a master's infectious diseases by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Diseases near Euston, for those that are London based. And there was a guy on my corridor that I hadn't really interacted with, but I'd see daily. I realized he's quite a high up just because of his attire and the way he used to talk and the kind of people he used to talk with. And then I just, in passing, or my manager actually told me, once I told her of sort of my desires to get more into outbreak management and maybe look at going to hospitals actually and shadow infection control nurses, that this guy actually specializes in it. And then I realized, oh, this guy has written a textbook that I'm currently using this year. So I'd say initially the barrier was just trying to figure out the route, but ultimately just being more open with what your interests are at the time. People will put you in touch with people either in your immediate environment or sort of distant connects. And I spoke to people like Kevin Fenton, as I've mentioned, who just given me tips just to try things. So that's how I would answer that.
I think that last point that you made about sort of connections, networking is just so important in anything that you do. And I think, I mean, for me personally, it doesn't come naturally to me in terms of my personality, but it has been so valuable. You never know who you'll meet and you know, what information that they have, what area they work in, how you can help each other, what you can learn from each other. So I've really found that networking is just so key and crucial, whatever you've gone into, you know, whatever route you've taken and whatever field you've gone into. And that point as well about just finding the route, I think, I don't know about you know, how you feel, but you know, doing a biomedical sciences degree, at the time that I did it, it was, you know, a case of, well, you can do anything, you know, anything lab-based, you know, you can go into that. But that's a very sort of daunting prospect for someone who's just finishing a degree. What encompasses everything? So I think it really can take a while to actually find what the options are, and then deciding, you know, how you want to move forward, because half of the time you didn't even know that these things were an option, you know, when you were, you know, making the steps that you were in terms of what degree to take and things like that.
Can I just add something to that as well? The sort of
Sure.
the shadowing in the workplace experience as much as you can get, just to really experience it. So for example, at that time where I found out that guy had written my textbook, he actually put me in touch with someone at Nottingham. I went and did a shadow the infection control nurse there. I got to see what that looked like in practice rather than just reading from textbooks. The other opportunity that came from that is right at the beginning of COVID, before it even develops the algorithms for like the primary response. Say someone comes in with suspected symptoms into, they call the ambulance, they're coming into A&E, what do you do? And I was just happened to be there shadowing for a couple of days because I told my manager of my wishes, and just being able to see that kind of thing makes your dream comes alive, and then it builds a better picture. And then the more you talk to people, they give you the more practical steps. So yeah, I'll just add by saying that as well.
Yeah, I'd say that as well, especially like, as you say, like I've been in that situation, and, you know, it's about who you know. And when, you know, it was more like I'd speak to microbiologists and go, I'm really interested, or I was really interested in antimicrobial resistance. So I spoke to the antibiotic pharmacist and said, can I shadow you? And then I ended up being part of that team. And then it was myself, the antimicrobial pharmacist, and the microbiologist would go around and look at everybody who's on meropenem and vancomycin in the hospital and identify where they should be. And from that, we then developed the carbapenemase resistant algorithm. We then did that screening because we had a case. We had a case who had not come from abroad, never left the country. And then we were like, hang on, there's a problem here. And we also did it for E. coli screening in neonates. But because they knew I had an interest, because I'd sort of gone, hello, I know I'm just a nurse, but, you know, I have actually got an interest, they then utilised me. And I got so much out of it. And then that is good to put on your CV. It really is. I hate to, I didn't do it for that reason, but it's good. But also as a manager as well, and I've been a manager a while now, if I've got a member of staff that's got an interest in it, I'll push them all the way. I'll see how much I can get them. I'll get them placements. Doesn't matter if it's not in critical care or infection control or something like that. If I can get them a placement, or if I know somebody who knows somebody, then yeah, you know, always speak up. Or do you know what? What's the worst case scenario? Someone's going to say no. But, you know, you never know till you ask, do you?
Absolutely. And that's the thing, the worst that can happen is that somebody says no, and you just keep asking, and eventually you will probably find someone that will be willing to give you a day, you know, a couple of hours, you know, somewhere, and that will be, you know, valuable. So just keep asking, keep pushing. You know, you're not losing anything by doing that at all, and sort of getting your name out there, getting your face out there. And, you know, if there are sort of professional sort of bodies, networks that you can sort of be a part of, going to events, things like that, where you're able to, you know, get yourself out there, you know, you're never going to be losing by putting yourself in that position. We have quite a long question here for Alice, so I will just read that out for you. Hi Alice, thank you for sharing your experience. I'm a public health worker in Canada with a BSc in Public Health and Epidemiology. I'm working as a project manager overseeing a new hospital to service rural Canada. I'm wanting to focus more in infectious diseases, and I have been seeing how the UK offers more international deployments available. I was wondering if you have any tips for how to transfer my skills across the pond.
Yeah, that's a bit of a tricky one, because I know when I was in Canada, they didn't have infection control nurses, so I had to become an epidemiology nurse, and to achieve that I had to do a degree in earth sciences, and I was a bit like, why? Saying that, I absolutely loved it. And I did actually use quite a lot of it instead of using my soil sciences. It wasn't until I did the primary survey that I was like, oh, this is why I'm learning about the chemistry of rocks. But it was really interesting, and it has been useful, and it's been useful since as well, especially all the climate change stuff going on. And I was able to look at not only human epidemiology, but also animal epidemiology. So I looked into why seals got the distemper virus in East Anglia, whereas they didn't get them in Nova Scotia, yet the two colonies mix. I also looked at the increase in hantavirus due to El Nino, and things like that. So you can transfer. I would say the best thing to do is, if you want to transfer your skills over, is literally just to ask a university. I found most of my skills was able to transfer them. The only thing I wasn't able to transfer was my intensive care course over to the UK. But that's been the only thing I haven't been able to transfer. Most things between Canada and England are pretty good. And as you'll probably realise as well, that most universities, so like King's College London, where I completed my degree, my nursing degree, that links in with Ottawa University. So when I went back and I said, yeah, I've been studying at the Ottawa Carleton Geoscience Centre, they were just like, yeah, no problems whatsoever. So I was able to APEL stuff across and transfer it across. So I would have a look. It's probably just worth, what I did was I sort of contacted a British university just to make sure that my qualifications were relevant over here, that my BSc in Earth Sciences was equivalent over here. So I just did it when I asked, but you'll find, I mean, I had to do my nursing exams when I went to Canada, but that was it. But that's the same across the world. But yeah, I quite honest, I just ask, well, if you apply for a job at like something like Public Health England or something, they will, they'll able to help you to say whether those qualifications are transferable. But 9 times out of 10 they are.
Thank you for that, Alice. I can see that we have somebody has their hand up. Bear with me. If you unmute yourself, Fatima, please feel free to speak.
Hello. So I've just recently graduated with a BSc on Environmental Sciences. And I would like to know what job opportunities do you have?
Okay, thank you. If you could just mute yourself again, Fatima, and then we'll let Josh and Alice answer in terms of if there are any sort of opportunities in their given environments at the moment.
Starting sort of in health protection, there is sort of a call out for sort of health protection practitioners. But you said that you've just qualified, is what you're saying, isn't it? So ideally, you want sort of some experience in a setting where, and it's a hard one. I don't know specifically, actually, because you might be able to, but I remember when I was first inquiring from my biomedical science post in Collindale in the reference lab, they wanted you to have, it's about getting the foot in, as I was saying earlier, and that for me was just getting the shadowing opportunities to then be able to write about it. So actually, technically, you don't need like a further education degree at that point to enter health protection. As I might have mentioned, and if I didn't earlier, there's a lot of allied health professionals that come from all sorts of backgrounds, from sort of health visitors to people that work in other specialist roles. Some of them were clinical psychologists, one of my colleagues was, so sort of varying backgrounds. But in terms of your earlier beginnings, my advice would be just to look at, I'd suppose, a more junior entry level into sort of at least an understanding of, okay, infectious diseases in the human body, or within a zoonotic setting, maybe like APHA, and then having maybe that shadowing experience of the outbreak side of things, which then come married together in sort of that health protection where you're looking at. So for me, it was the East of England and looking after sort of those communities within the East of England. So marrying that outbreak with sort of the infectious diseases side where you can get those, I'd say start there. And yeah, use my tips of just looking at the job descriptions ahead of time, even if they're way above what you want to go into, like that entry level as an advising. Look ahead and look what the qualities that they want in those job descriptions, and just work back from there and see how you can then sort of forge your own experience as well as maybe that entry level job. So that's how I'd answer it. Sorry if it was a bit, but I hope you got the gist.
Thanks for that, Josh. That was yeah, really useful tips there for sure. Alice, have you got anything to add for that point?
No, I'd agree as well. I'd say you probably will have to go in at junior sort of entry level, and that's not a bad thing, to be quite honest, because it enables you then to put what you've learned at university to put it into practice, and as I said, develop those skills that you'll need. It'll also give you time as well, just to identify, help you. Give yourself some time, give yourself permission to have that time. You know, you've got a lot of years to work to decide where you actually want to go. It might be that you've got this set idea that you want to, you know, go in this direction, but actually you might end up doing a placement and going, well, actually this is the place to be. Josh is true as well. I did that as well. It's like it's about that networking thing as well. And if you want to go into a certain area and they say you haven't got the qualification, have a look at those job descriptions, have a look at what they want from them, and it might be that gives you an indication of how you can get into the area that you want to get into as well. Also, if you do go for interviews, it's a really good idea to get feedback, because might be that they turn around and say, do you know what, you were almost there, you just need to work on this. Or I recently did some interviews to do with public health, and it was like, you know what, you need to have that background in infection control. Yes, you're a nurse, yes, you're an infection control nurse, but actually you need that extra insight into public health, sorry, not infection control, into public health, and understand how it's different and how you look at working within your community different to how you're working in a hospital, and you're looking at demographics of population. So it's adapting your mindset. So I would say, yeah, I would say start at the bottom. We've all had to start at the bottom, and it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It does also give you that breathing space just to develop as a person and develop your skills.
That's great. Thank you for your input there as well, Alice. We do have a few more questions as well. So I think this is one for Josh. Somebody's just asked, what does FES stand for?
Yes, give me a reminder of where did I include that in my slides? What's the context? Feel free to unmute as well. Just
yeah, exactly. That might be helpful, actually. No.
Also gonna have a look as well.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, superb. It was the slide, the organogram slide.
Ah, okay. Let's go there. Okay, so this is on sort of the business support side. So this was less sort of health protection role, but more on the support. Off the top of my head, I'll be very honest with you, I don't remember. This is slightly outdated, as I mentioned as well. We do have a new one, as we are the UKHSA now, but it was to do with sort of the administration, which has a lot to do with what we can do. We can't do what we do without them. So I had to give my props to business support as well. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'll probably get it to you after if you're desperate to know.
Okay, thank you.
That's fine.
Okay, thanks for that, Josh. We do have another few questions as well. So this question will be for both Alice and Josh. Just what do you enjoy most about your role?
Alice, feel free to go first.
Oh, okay, I was going to let you go first. But what do I like most about my role? It's really, really sad, I know, it's probably, but I just like the fact I get to help people and look after people. And it just, I don't know. I just get a great sense of satisfaction when someone's come in so poorly that they end up in my intensive care unit, and we see them come out the other side. And that was especially true with COVID, which is probably why I wanted to come back to ITU, because it's so rewarding when you've had somebody ventilated for over 100 days because of COVID, and they leave your unit. I mean, admittedly, he wasn't walking, but he was in a wheelchair and breathing for himself, which I still can't believe because his lungs must have been like cardboard. Yeah, it's incredibly satisfying. And also, I love being a manager. I love having my team of nurses, HCAs. I've also got physios. I work closely with theatres. I got students. And I love seeing them grow. It's like, it's just like being a mum at work, really. I see my little chickens all grow and leave the nest, all qualified. So yeah, I find my role really rewarding, but I also find I'm learning stuff every single day. Things, science is evolving every single day. The world's critical care, infectious diseases, everything's evolving every single day. And, every day is a school day. And yeah, that's why I love my job. So.
My response is very similar. For me, and it's sort of guided me in sort of my search for my next steps, really, is the health protection identified my strength in terms of the interaction with the end service users, which in sort of biomedical science is very limited in that I felt like I was doing a service onto people, but very indirectly, i.e. like diagnosing them and helping them on their way to resolving their disease or whatever it was, i.e. by treatment, etc. But the health protection side of things really put me on the front line, as you are first responders, and particularly where I was doing interviews with cases and actually in the brink of the COVID pandemic, in the height of the peaks. There's a lot of emotional care home managers, and I found myself as almost a bit of a counselor, if I'm being fair. And there's a certain sort of emotional intelligence as well as technical intelligence that comes into play, and it's really being sensitive to the environment that they're in, and particularly with the care home managers who have a lot of vulnerable patients within their care, and there's massive outbreaks going on. They do feel a bit helpless at times, or very just angry with the leadership, i.e. the government who we represent. I'm not related to Boris, but him and his team's measures, we are giving risk assessment advice based on those parameters as health protection practitioners. So a lot of them did get upset with me, and I had a few stories, which I won't go into all of them now, where there was direct anger at me. But at the end of the day, sort of working through those sort of emotions and giving them the technical advice needed to help them, at least, even if it's not solved straight away, feel at ease that actually they have help, is sort of what's the most fulfilling part for me.
That's great, thank you. And then we have just one final question again, which will be for both of you. What does the future look like in public health, specifically in health protection, in your opinion?
Oh, the future looks like, it's going to give a very cliche answer about what. The future looks like, I think, unfortunately, there's going to be more incidences of our re-emerging or emergent diseases. Hopefully nothing on the scale like we saw with COVID. And monkeypox is yet to be determined, really. But as we can see, like in the UK, leading sort of the world in cases was really abnormal. There's still a lot of questions around that, of just why that is and why now, and particularly amongst the risk factor groups. But going forward overall, I'd say it's just more interconnected work, more sort of cross-learning. So even in my day-to-day, we have a lot of people that have come either from the public health registrar program, or have come from the local authorities, coming to sort of cross-train and experience what it's like on the front line. Because the local authorities deal more with sort of the local borough governing, basically, more sort of like how does systems run within the borough. And so they get to see the more technical science side of things. So I think it looks like more collaboration between teams within public health. And I think it looks like naturally more technological advances to make the whole surveillance system easier and like, for example, I was mentioning with integrated care services system, I think that will have a big play on how we function as public health, just how data is shared and service users can access the services to help them in situations of outbreaks, etc. So yeah, I'd say more collaboration, more technological advances for surveillance and reacting to disease outbreaks.
I was going to say, I think this is a really exciting time to be in public health, or to be associated with it, because obviously I'm sort of indirectly associated with it now. But I think it's an exciting time. I do agree. We will see more of this, but that's evolution. It's survival of the fittest. You know, and I learned that very much when I was studying microbiology, when doing my infection control course. You know, you see how clever these little things are, these things that we can't see. And I think it's fascinating. And that's when you realise it's survival of the fittest, and we've just got to get there first, to be quite honest. And we've seen this with this the last outbreak, and now with this recent outbreak. And we saw it before. You know, this isn't the first time these things have happened, but it's the first time it's happened on these scales. You're all far too young to remember, but I remember looking after flu. I was a student nurse when we had flu before the flu vaccination. Not on the scale of COVID, but we ran out of beds. We were nursing patients in the corridors. We ran out of morgue space. We had to put people in the gyms. You know, not the scale of COVID, but I remember it before the vaccination. Look how the vaccination has changed everything. And then we got H1N1, swine flu. And again, then we started, you know, seeing pregnant ladies coming into ITU to be ventilated. So I do think this is an exciting time to be in. I think we've learned an awful lot from the pandemic, and I think it's made us very humble and realize that actually the basics, washing your hands. I mean, how often us people have been saying, I mean, there was this chap called Semmelweis, and he was a Hungarian. He's like the grandfather of hand hygiene, and he noted, it was like 1860 or something, and he noticed that people were dying in his maternity ward, those who had been looked after people but hadn't washed their hands, and he was deemed mad. He was put in a lunatic asylum. Yeah, he was right. Washing hands prevents the spread of infections. So I think it is exciting times. I think it's shown as well that we work very well, and I think as well we're very lucky to be in this country. I always remember when I was sort of growing up, it was like Britain has the brains, we just don't know how to build it. That's why we have the French and German, and that's what we used to get targeted. And I think it's exciting times. This country's got so many resources. We've proved that with developing the vaccination. And again, I think, as Josh has highlighted, I think finally integrated care services, that's what we need. You know, I should be talking to primary healthcare. I should be letting them know what's going on. I should be letting public health and local authorities know what's going on in my intensive care unit, so that they should let me know what's going on in the community, so we can work together to try and improve the health of the nation, not just from an infectious disease point of view, but from a general health population point of view as well. So I think it's really exciting times, and I think you can definitely make it what you want to make it. You can definitely channel the interests that you've got, and achieve something great. I think it's exciting times.
That's great. Thank you so much to both Alice and Josh. And that was our final question. And I really do hope that our attendees have found, as I said, this is interesting and insightful as I have. I've learned so much about just another area of healthcare and or science. So thank you so much. I'll just hand over to Tolu, who will just do our closing statements. Okay.
That's always a start, isn't it? On mute. Okay. Yes, I just wanted to say a big thank you to our speakers, Alice and Josh. Josh, I didn't realize you were a fellow Essex alumna or alumnus. So yes, I also went to Essex as well. And Alice, big thank you. I worked with you at Richmond and Wandsworth on the COVID stuff, and honestly everything that she says, both of them, but I know Alice really, you really do push people, as you said, and you push me into the role that I'm in now. So I'm very encouraged by just the amount of wealth of knowledge that's been shared, and I hope everyone else has been. I think the key highlight for me is just now the crossover between science and public health and healthcare is so evident now. and it's great to see it played out in different various roles. So yeah, so thank you guys for that. So just quickly about us, how you can get in touch with Life Science Connections. We are on social media. Well, first of all, our website is www.lifescienceconnexions.co.uk. That's where you're able to find out about our events and our blogs and some of the information that that Ronke said in the beginning. You're able to keep up to date with that on there. We are also on Facebook as well. We are also on Instagram as well. So it's the same handle. Also on LinkedIn, Life Science Connections. Do keep in touch with us. As I said, this is a way for you to get in touch, ask questions, keep an eye out about our events, and also some of the things that's going on with us. We're on Twitter too, so a slightly different handle, Life Science Connexions. And also this is our email address on the screen here for you to get in contact with us. So I hope you've had a very, very profitable few hours. I know it's Friday evening, and I say this all the time, you could be doing anything, but you've chosen, to join us and to learn and develop in your careers. And I really do wish everyone who's joined on the call all the best in your careers and what you decide to do. We hope to hear from you as well in the future. Maybe this will be a chance for you to let us know in a year or plus time about what you're doing, and we'll have you on one of our events. The world is your oyster, as they say. So we'll sign up for now. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a very good evening.